Hi, I'm Mr. Information. Before we start to discuss the topic, you should click the subscribe button and hit the notification bell. So let's begin. Wajwar is an Egyptian god of fertility whose name means the Great Green. It was commonly believed that Wajwar was a personification of the Mediterranean Sea. However, it is apparently more likely that he rather represented the lagoons and lakes in the northernmost Nile Delta, as suggested by some texts describing this Great Green as dry lands which could be crossed by foot, possibly a mention of the edge between two or more lakes. The earliest known attestation of Wajwar is dated back to the 5th dynasty in the mortuary temple of the Pyramid of Sihor at Abusir. Here, he appears similar to the god Hapi, but with his body filled by water ripples. He also appears on the walls of the much later tomb QV55 of Prince Amenhotep, son of Pharaoh Ramesses III. Thoth is one of the ancient Egyptian deities. In art, he was often depicted as a man with the head of an ibis or a baboon, animals sacred to him. His feminine counterpart was Seshat, and his wife was Maat. He was the god of wisdom, writing, hieroglyphs, science, magic, art, judgment, and the dead. Thoth's chief temple was located in the city of Hermopolis, later known as El Ashmanein in Egyptian Arabic. It was partially destroyed in 1826. In Hermopolis, Thoth led the Agode, a pantheon of 8 principal deities, and his spouse was Nemetawi. He also had numerous shrines in other cities. Thoth played many vital and prominent roles in Egyptian mythology, such as maintaining the universe, and being one of the 2 deities who stood on either side of Ra's solar barge. In the later history of ancient Egypt, Thoth became heavily associated with the arbitration of godly disputes, the arts of magic, the system of writing, the development of science, and the judgment of the dead. Sopdu was a god of the sky and of eastern border regions in ancient Egyptian religion. He was Khensit's husband. As a sky god, Sopdu was connected with the god Sa, the personification of the constellation Orion, and the goddess Sopdet, representing the star Sirius. According to the pyramid text, Horus Sopdu, a combination of Sopdu and the greater sky god Horus, is the offspring of Osiris Sa and Isis Sopdet. As a god of the East, Sopdu was said to protect Egyptian outposts along the frontiers and to help the pharaoh control those regions' foreign inhabitants. He was referred to as Lord of the East, and had his greatest cult center at the easternmost nome of Lower Egypt, which was named per Sopdu, meaning place of Sopdu. He also had shrines of Egyptian settlements in the Sinai Peninsula, such as the turquoise mines at Surat el-Qadim. Sopdu's name is composed of the hieroglyph for sharp, a pointed triangle, and the third-person plural suffix, thus a literal translation of his name is sharp ones. He was said, in the pyramid text, to protect the teeth of the deceased pharaoh. Sopdu was depicted as a falcon sitting on a religious standard, often with a 2-feathered crown on his head and a flail over his shoulder. In his border-guarding role, he was shown as a Near Eastern warrior, with a shemset girdle and an axe or spear. Sobek, in Greek, Suchos, and from Latin Suchus, was an ancient Egyptian deity with a complex and fluid nature. He is associated with the Nile crocodile or the West African crocodile and is represented either in its form or as a human with a crocodile head. Sobek was also associated with pharaonic power, fertility, and military prowess, but served additionally as a protective deity with apotropaic qualities, invoked particularly for protection against the dangers presented by the Nile. Shu was one of the primordial Egyptian gods, spouse and brother to goddess Tefnut, and one of the 9 deities of the Ennead of the Heliopolis cosmogony. He was the god of peace, lions, air, and wind. Seth is a god of chaos, fire, deserts, trickery, storms, envy, disorder, violence, and foreigners in ancient Egyptian religion. In ancient Greek, the god's name is given as Seth. Set had a positive role where he accompanies Ra on his solar boat to repel Apep, the serpent of chaos. Set had a vital role as a reconciled combatant. He was lord of the Red Desert land, where he was the balance to Horus' role as lord of the Black Soil land. In the Osiris myth, the most important Egyptian myth, Set is portrayed as the usurper who killed and mutilated his own brother Osiris. Osiris's wife Isis reassembled his corpse and resurrected her dead husband long enough to conceive his son and heir Horus. Horus sought revenge upon Set, and the myths describe their conflicts. Ra was portrayed as a falcon and shared characteristics with the sky god Horus. At times the two deities were merged as Ra-Harakti, Ra, who is Horus of the two horizons. In the New Kingdom, when the god Amun rose to prominence, he was fused with Ra into Amun-Ra. The cult of the Nevis bull, an embodiment of Ra, had its center in Heliopolis, and there was a formal burial ground for the sacrificed bulls north of the city. All forms of life were believed to have been created by Ra. In some accounts, humans were created from Ra's tears and sweat, hence the Egyptians called themselves the cattle of Ra. In the myth of the celestial cow, it is recounted how mankind plotted against Ra and how he sent his eye as the goddess Sekhmet to punish them. Ptah is the demiurge of Memphis, god of 8 craftsmen and architects. In the Triad of Memphis, he is the husband of Sekhmet and the father of Nefertum. He was also regarded as the father of the sage Imhotep. Ptah is an Egyptian creator god who existed before all other things and, by his will, thought the world into existence. It was first conceived by thought, and realized by the word. Ptah conceives the world by the thought of his heart and gives life through the magic of his word. That which Ptah commanded was created, with which the constituents of nature, fauna, and flora are contained. He also plays a role in the preservation of the world and the permanence of the royal function. In the 25th dynasty, the Nubian pharaoh Shabaka would transcribe on a stela known as the Shabaka stone, an old theological document found in the archives of the library of the Temple of the God of Memphis. This document has been known as the Memphite theology, and shows the god Ptah, the deity responsible for the creation of the universe by thought and by the word. Ptah is the patron of craftsmanship, metalworking, carpenters, shipbuilders, and sculpture. He bears many epithets that describe his role in ancient Egyptian religion and its importance in society at the time. Ptah the beautiful face. Ptah Lord of Truth, Ptah Master of Justice, Ptah who listens to prayers, Ptah Master of Ceremonies, Ptah Lord of Eternity. He was the god of the sun, order, kings, power, and the sky. Osiris is the god of fertility, alcohol, agriculture, the afterlife, the dead, resurrection, life, and vegetation in ancient Egyptian religion. He was classically depicted as a green-skinned deity with a pharaoh's beard, partially mummy-wrapped at the legs, wearing a distinctive Atef crown, and holding a symbolic crook and flail. He was one of the first to be associated with the mummy wrap. When his brother, Set, cut him up into pieces after killing him, Isis, his wife, found all the pieces and wrapped his body up. Osiris was at times considered the eldest son of the god Geb and the sky goddess Nut, as well as being brother and husband of Isis, with Horus being considered his posthumously begotten son. He was also associated with the epithet Khanti Ameneu, meaning, for most of the Westerners, a reference to his kingship in the land of the dead. As ruler of the dead, Osiris was also sometimes called King of the Living. Ancient Egyptians considered the blessed dead the living ones. Nemti was a god whose worship centered at Antiopolis in the northern part of Upper Egypt. Nemti's worship is quite ancient, dating from at least the 2nd dynasty, at which point he already had priests dedicated to his cult. Originally, Nemti appears to have been the patron of the ancient area around Badari, which was the center of the cult of Horus. Due to lack of surviving information, it is not very well known what the original function of Nemti was, or whether he was more than just a title of Horus referring to some specific function. Over time, EGPYT became considered simply as the god of ferrymen and was consequently depicted as a falcon standing on a boat, a reference to Horus, who was originally considered as a falcon. As god of ferrymen, he gained the title EGPYT, meaning travels. His later cult center Antiopolis, but also in Per-Nemtyt, House of Nemtyt, in the 12th Upper Egyptian Nome. EGPYT appears in the tale The Contendings of Horus and Seth, which describes the settlement of the inheritance of Osiris. Seen as a metaphor for the conquest of Lower Egypt by Upper Egypt at the beginning of the Old Kingdom. In this tale, one of Seth's attempts to gain power consists of his gathering together the gods and providing good arguments, convincing all of them. Seth fears magical intervention by Isis, Horus' wife, and so holds the gathering on an island, instructing EGPYT not to allow anyone resembling Isis to be ferried there. However, Isis disguises herself as an old woman, and unknowingly EGPYT takes her across after being paid a gold ring, having rejected the first offer of gruel, resulting in the disruption of the council by her use of magic. EGPYT is punished for his error by having his toes cut off, which is more severe than it appears, since as a falcon, he would no longer be able to perch, and thus would not be able to reside on the boat. Nefertem was, in Egyptian mythology, originally a lotus flower at the creation of the world who had arisen from the primal waters. Nefertem represented both the first sunlight and the delightful smell of the Egyptian blue lotus flower, having arisen from the primal waters within an Egyptian blue water lily, Nymphaea caerulea. Some of the titles of Nefertem were, He Who Is Beautiful, and Water Lily of the Sun, and a version of the Book of the Dead says, Rise like Nefertem from the blue water lily, to the nostrils of Ra, and come forth upon the horizon each day. Nefertem was eventually seen as the son of the creator god Ptah, and the goddesses Sekhmet and Bast were sometimes called his mother. In art, Nefertem is usually depicted as a beautiful young man having blue water lily flowers around his head. As the son of Bastet, he also sometimes has the head of a lion or is a lion or cat reclining. The ancient Egyptians often carried small statuettes of him as good luck charms. There is a head of Nefertem depicting Tutankhamun as a child. Montu was a falcon god of war in ancient Egyptian religion, an embodiment of the conquering vitality of the pharaoh. He was particularly worshipped in Upper Egypt and in the district of Thebes. Despite being a Delta native astral deity, a very ancient god, Montu was originally a manifestation of the scorching effect of Ra, the sun, and as such often appeared under the epithet Montu Ra. The destructiveness of this characteristic led to him gaining characteristics of a warrior, and eventually becoming a widely revered war god. The Egyptians thought that Montu would attack the enemies of Maat while inspiring, at the same time, glorious warlike exploits. It is possible that Montu Ra and Autumn Ra symbolize the two kingships, respectively, of Upper and Lower Egypt. When linked with Horus, Montu's epithet was Horus of the strong arm, because of the association of raging bulls with strength and war. The Egyptians also believed that Montu manifested himself as a white, black-snouted bull named Butchis, to the point that, in the late period 7th–4th century BC, Montu was depicted with a bull's head too. This special sacred bull had dozens of servants and wore precious crowns and bibs. Mahus was an ancient Egyptian lion-headed god of war, whose name means he who is true beside her. He was seen as the son of the creator god Ptah, as well as the feline goddess whose nature he shared. Mahus was a deity associated with war, protection, and weather, as well as that of knives, lotuses, and devouring captives. His cult was centered in Tarimu and Per-Bast, the cult centers of Sekhmet and Bast respectively. Khonsu is the ancient Egyptian god of the moon. His name means traveler, and this may relate to the nightly travel of the moon across the sky. Along with Thoth, he marked the passage of time. Khonsu was instrumental in the creation of new life in all living creatures. At Thebes he formed part of a family triad with Mut as his mother and Amun his father. Khonsu's name reflects the fact that the moon travels across the night sky, for it means traveler, and also had the titles Embracer, Pathfinder, and Defender, as he was thought to watch over those who travel at night. As the god of light in the night, Khonsu was invoked to protect against wild animals and aid with healing. It was said that when Khonsu caused the crescent moon to shine, women conceived, cattle became fertile, and all nostrils and every throat was filled with fresh air. Khnum was one of the earliest known Egyptian deities, originally the god of the source of the Nile. Since the annual flooding of the Nile brought with it silt and clay, and its water brought life to its surroundings, he was thought to be the creator of the bodies of human children, which he made at a potter's wheel, from clay, and placed in their mothers' uteruses. He later was described as having molded the other deities, and he had the titles Divine Potter and Lord of Created Things from himself. Khepri is a scarab-faced god in ancient Egyptian religion who represents the rising or morning sun. By extension, he can also represent creation and the renewal of life. Khepri the god was connected with the scarab beetle because the scarab rolls balls of dung across the ground, an act that the Egyptians saw as a symbol of the forces that move the sun across the sky. Khepri was thus a solar deity. Young dung beetles, having been laid as eggs within the dung ball, emerge from it fully formed. Therefore, Khepri also represented creation and rebirth, and he was specifically connected with the rising sun and the mythical creation of the world. Horus is one of the most significant ancient Egyptian deities. He was worshipped from at least the late prehistoric Egypt until the Ptolemaic kingdom in Roman Egypt. Different forms of Horus are recorded in history, and these are treated as distinct gods by Egyptologists. These various forms may possibly be different manifestations of the same multi-layered deity in which certain attributes or syncretic relationships are emphasized. Not necessarily in opposition but complementary to one another, consistent with how the ancient Egyptians viewed the multiple facets of reality. He was most often depicted as a falcon, most likely a lanner falcon or peregrine falcon, or as a man with a falcon head. The earliest recorded form of Horus is the tutelary deity of Nekhen in Upper Egypt, who is the first known national god, specifically related to the ruling pharaoh who in time came to be regarded as a manifestation of Horus in life and Osiris in death. The most commonly encountered family relationship describes Horus as the son of Isis and Osiris, and he plays a key role in the Osiris myth as Osiris's heir in the rival to Set, the murderer of Osiris. In another tradition, Hathor is regarded as his mother and sometimes as his wife. Horus served many functions, most notably being a god of kingship and the sky. Geb was the Egyptian god of the earth and later a member of the Ennead of Heliopolis. He had a viper around his head and was thus also considered the father of snakes. It was believed in ancient Egypt that Geb's laughter created earthquakes and that he allowed crops to grow. The oldest representation in a fragmentary relief of the god was as an anthropomorphic bearded being accompanied by his name, and dating from King Djoser's reign, 3rd dynasty, and was found in Heliopolis. In later times he could also be depicted as a ram, a bull or a crocodile. Geb was frequently feared as father of snakes, son of the earth. In a coffin text spell, Geb was described as father of the snake Nehebkau. In mythology, Geb also often occurs as a primeval divine king of Egypt from whom his son Osiris and his grandson Horus inherited the land after many contendings with the disruptive god Set, brother and killer of Osiris. Geb could also be regarded as personified fertile earth and barren desert, the latter containing the dead or setting them free from their tombs. Metaphorically described as Geb opening his jaws or imprisoning those that are not worthy to go to the fertile northeastern heavenly field of reeds. In the latter case, one of his otherworldly attributes was an ominous jackal-headed stave rising from the ground onto which enemies could be bound. In the Heliopolitan Ennead, a group of 9 gods created in the beginning by the one god Autumn or Ra, Geb is the husband of Nut, the sky or visible daytime and nightly firmament. the son of the earlier primordial elements Tefnut, moisture, and Shu, emptiness, and the father to the four lesser gods of the system Osiris, Seth, Isis, and Nephthys. In this context, Geb was believed to have originally been engaged with Nut and had to be separated from her by Shu, god of the air. Consequently, in mythological depictions, Geb was shown as a man reclining, sometimes with his phallus still pointed towards Nut. Geb and Nut together formed the permanent boundary between the primeval waters and the newly created world. The Bennu is an ancient Egyptian deity linked with the sun, creation, and rebirth. It may have been the inspiration for the phoenix in Greek mythology. According to Egyptian mythology, the Bennu was a self-created being said to have played a role in the creation of the world. It was said to be the Ba of Ra and enabled the creative actions of Adam. It was said to have flown over the waters of none that existed before creation, landing on a rock and issuing a call that determined the nature of creation. It was also a symbol of rebirth and was therefore associated with Osiris. Some of the titles of the Bennu bird were He Who Came Into Being by Himself and Lord of Jubilees. The latter epithet referred to the belief that the Bennu periodically renewed itself like the sun. Its name is related to the Egyptian verb wbn, meaning to rise in brilliance or to shine. Atum, sometimes rendered as the Tem or Tem, is an important deity in Egyptian mythology. In the Heliopolitan creation myth, Atum was considered to be the first god, having created himself sitting on a mound from the primordial waters. Early myths state that Atum created the god Shu and goddess Tefnut by spitting them out of his mouth. To explain how Atum did this, the myth uses the metaphor of masturbation, with the hand he used in this act representing the female principle inherent within him. Other interpretations state that he has made union with his shadow. In the Old Kingdom, the Egyptians believed that Atum lifted the dead king's soul from his pyramid to the starry heavens. He was also a solar deity, associated with the primary sun god Ra. Atum was linked specifically with the evening sun, while Ra or the closely linked god Khepri were connected with the sun at morning and midday. In the Book of the Dead, which was still current in the Greco-Roman period, the sun god Atum is said to have ascended from chaos waters with the appearance of a snake, the animal renewing itself every morning. Atum is the god of pre-existence and post-existence. In the binary solar cycle, the serpentine Atum is contrasted with the ram-headed scarab Khepri, the young sun god, whose name is derived from the Egyptian HPR, to come into existence. Khepri Atum encompass sunrise and sunset, thus reflecting the entire cycle of morning and evening. Amun is a major ancient Egyptian deity who appears as a member of the Hermopolitan Ogdoad. Amun was attested from the Old Kingdom together with his wife Amalnet. With the 11th dynasty, Amun rose to the position of patron deity of Thebes by replacing Montu. After the rebellion of Thebes against the Hyksos and with the rule of Ahmose I, Amun acquired national importance, expressed in his fusion with the sun god Ra as Amun-Ra or Amun-Re. Amun-Ra retained chief importance in the Egyptian pantheon throughout the New Kingdom. Amun-Ra in this period held the position of transcendental, self-created creator deity par excellence. He was the champion of the poor or troubled and central to personal piety. His position as king of gods developed to the point of virtual monotheism where other gods became manifestations of him. With Osiris, Amun-Ra is the most widely recorded of the Egyptian gods. As the chief deity of the Egyptian empire, Amun-Ra also came to be worshipped outside Egypt. According to the testimony of ancient Greek historiographers in Libya and Nubia, as Zeus Ammon, he came to be identified with Zeus in Greece. Anhur, also spelled Onuris, Enheret. Enheret was originally a god of war who was worshipped in the Egyptian area of Abydos, and particularly in Thinis. Myths told that he had brought his wife, Methit, who was his female counterpart, from Nubia, and his name reflects this. It means one who leads back the distant one. One of his titles was Slayer of Enemies. Anhur was depicted as a bearded man wearing a robe and a headdress with 4 feathers, holding a spear or lance, or occasionally as a lion-headed god, representing strength and power. In some depictions, the robe was more similar to a kilt. Aker was an ancient Egyptian earth and death deity. Aker was first depicted as the torso of a recumbent lion with a widely opened mouth. Later, he was depicted as 2 recumbent lion torsos merged with each other and still looking away from each other. From Middle Kingdom onwards, Aker appears as a pair of twin lions. One named Duaj, meaning yesterday, and the other Sefer, meaning tomorrow. Aker was thus often titled he who's looking forward and behind. When depicted as a lion pair, hieroglyphic sign for horizon and a sun disk was put between the lions. The lions were sitting back on back. In later times, Aker can also appear as 2 merged torsos of recumbent sphinxes with human heads. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoy it. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more video. If you want to advertise your product, just let me know.